Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's time for another Trump update. This one centers around Marjorie Taylor Greene's post concerning Iran and foreign wars, as well as some other issues. I'm going to start with the other issues first. And she made some good points in this post. For instance, DOGE is making these cuts, yet the budget that's proposed spends more than the last one. We still have the COVID vaccine. I mean, it's still approved by the FDA, which is wrong. We still got the transgender issue as far as the surgery, and it seems to still be being pushed. And I think part of this is this was not all directed at Trump per se, and she never mentioned Trump, obviously. But I think part of it was also aimed at the Congress, the fact that they haven't really done anything since Trump's been in office, anything good anyway. And also mentioned the lawfare, which I've mentioned several times on this show. The judiciary is out of control, and the Congress can put them in check, and they should put them in check, not just wait and hope that the Supreme Court does it. But two of the big things that concerned her the one big issue was foreign wars. Now, she talked about Ukraine and the mineral deal that we just made, which I agree. I think that's a mistake. We gave Ukraine all this money. If they could use those minerals somehow to pay us back, that's one thing. But actually setting up and us running a shop, running an industry there in Ukraine, right on the Russian border, that just means we're going to be there long term, and it just more possibilities of things going wrong. I mean, I think that was a mistake. The other thing is the whole situation with Iran. Now, I really thought we should have turned Iran into glass decades ago. All right, 79, they took our hostages, kept them for almost 2 years. Then in 83, we had 200 some Marines killed in Beirut. Iran was involved in that. We did nothing. Whoa, wait a minute. Let me back up. Oh, we sold tow missiles to the Iranians after that. That really irritated me. I was still in the Army at the time, and I'm like, wait a minute. The only way a tow missile should be going to Iran is if we're firing them at them. Firing them at their tanks, because that's what tow missiles were for. But we did nothing all these years. Even when we were in Iraq, a lot of the deadliest IEDs were from Iran. And I kind of doubt that all of them were just given to the Iraqis. Pretty good odds that you had Iranian actors on the ground, hitting our guys. But we didn't do anything. And we really could have had some impact while we were there in Iraq, right next to Iran. So as bad as they are, and they are the world's leading sponsor of terrorism, no doubt about that. And hey, if Israel were to take them out, I think that'd be a great thing. But I don't think, a couple things here, a couple key points. Number one, Trump has already made comments like, well, if we don't get a deal, which I don't know how you'd make a deal with them. I don't know how you could trust them. But if we don't get a deal, then, we might just bomb Iran. The Secretary of Defense has made comments about, we will get back at you. And this was in reference, of course, to the Houthis. We know that Iran is helping the Houthis and providing them ammunition and whatnot. And we have to defend our shipping in that lane, no doubt about it. But if you're going to go to war, we have a process. And that's been part of the problem, is we've been letting presidents in the past get us into wars. If this is war-worthy, if this is worthwhile for our country to go to war, then he needs to get a declaration of war from Congress. Bottom line. And really, with our military, I know we have a good Secretary of Defense now. We have a good Commander-in-Chief overall. And I think we can turn this thing around, but I don't think we've turned it around yet. He's only been in here, 90 days, 100 days? That's not enough time. We don't need to be in any foreign war. And if we're going to go, we have to go the right way. We need to get Congress cleared. Now, I know Congress is worthless. I'm not delusional. But we cannot continue to allow presidents, whether they're Republican, Democrat, to make the decision to get us into a war. And that's my thought on that. Now, I mentioned Iran and them being one of the main sponsors of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, which is the main one for everywhere and for decades. And that brings us to our guest tonight. Cathy Hinners, a decorated retired police officer from Albany, New York Police Department. Upon her retirement, she developed and instructed a 3-day class for law enforcement titled Middle Eastern Crime, Culture, and Community, based on the knowledge she acquired while working in an emerging Middle Eastern Muslim area. Tonight, she's bringing us an update on the Muslim Brotherhood, otherwise known as The Threat in Our Backyard, which she has a book by that title as well, and you can see it on her website, dailyrollcall.com. What they don't want you to know about Islamic extremism in Tennessee and America. And before I introduce Cathy, or reintroduce her, she's been on here several times and hopefully will be in the future, I want to touch back on Iran for just a second. Even though they are the main sponsor of Islamic terrorism, there's also this group called the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are probably one of the top dogs in this throughout the world. And the thing is, if you look at it, if you think about it, there's kind of a pattern our country has established. When we were fighting communism, in the 50s and the 60s, in the 50s, early 50s, we had the Korean War because we had to fight communists. In the 60s, we had to go to Vietnam because we had to stop the spread of communism. Well, not getting into how those things turned out, but at the same time we were doing that, we were allowing communists in our country. We were allowing them to run for office. The Democrat Party's been ate up with communists since the FDR administration. So it just seems like if you're going to go to war, then you don't want the enemy in your homeland. Well, we've done the same thing since 9/11. 24 years ago, yet what do we have in our country now that we have more mosques, we have more Muslims, we have Muslims in elected office. And now we have more Muslim communities. In fact, they're trying to build a whole community down there in Texas, the Epic Center. By the way, they already have some in other places. And we're going to talk about that tonight. So just think about that for a minute. Do we really need to go over there to fight them when the fight and the threat is here? I understand we'd have to do that different, okay? I'm not suggesting that we could drop bombs on the Epic City, all right? So I don't want anybody to take me wrong on that. That might be a personal preference, but that's not what I'm talking about. Anyway, Cathy, thank you for joining us. How are you? And what good, cheery news do you bring us about the Muslim Brotherhood and what they're doing in our country and in our state?
Well, it's never cheery, unfortunately, Dave. But, you had mentioned Epic City. Well, first, I just want to say about the Muslim Brotherhood, how we had talked about it earlier, that, we don't just allow them to exist in this country, we're allowing them to flourish in this country. And that is, aiding and abetting an enemy. And so at some point, I hope that our government will consider making the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization. That being said, we already know Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they're allowed to have protests every weekend and every day throughout cities in this country. So we need to rethink, our strategy for the future dealing with these threats. But Epic City, a lot of people have been talking about it. I was asked to give a talk last week in Columbia about it. People are concerned, and rightfully so. But Epic City is this humongous community. We call it an intentional community being built because it's all Muslims. It's all the work of Muslims. But when you think about these communities, why do they do this? And Muslims, we know, are trying to gain power and influence within our country. And so with power and influence, obviously comes votes. Yep. And then those votes, certainly from like-minded individuals, comes elections. Yep. And so this is how we, are seeing them affecting change. It's very small. It's incremental changes right now, but we are not Sharia compliant in this country. It is antithetical to our Constitution, yep. But yet we keep allowing these things to move forward, even though it's like baby steps. And they're very patient people. And so it's taken years for them to get this far, but this is where it's got to end. And so even though Governor Abbott in Texas, he launched an investigation to see the legalities of this, but it's like fighting if they want to build a mosque. They know that using the guise of religion, they know that our First Amendment certainly allows for freedom of religion. And so I just have two video clips, two short video clips from the guy that's behind all this. His name is Yasser Qadi, and I'd like to show the two video clips if we can, and then we can talk about Yasser Qadi's connection here in Tennessee.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and roll the tape, and then we got plenty to talk about after that. We'll play the first one, we'll talk, and then we'll play the second one and talk.
It is not my right to legislate or your right to legislate. No Supreme Court, no system of government, no democracy where they vote. Can you believe it? A group of people coming together and voting, and the majority vote will then be the law of the land. What gives you the right to prohibit something or allow something? Who gave you this right? Are you creators? Are you all knowledgeable? Do you understand the repercussions, the implications of the laws that you're going to pass? أَفَحُكْمَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ يَبْغُونَ? Do they wish to follow the laws of ignorance? Verily, Allah is our judge. He knows what's best for us. So we have to beware of following in this path of those people. Because unfortunately, we have many Muslims today who are influenced by this. And they'll say, okay, we'll take the laws of worship. We'll pray 5 times a day. We'll give the zakah. We'll go for pilgrimage. We'll fast the month of Ramadan. But as for family laws and the economic system and the punishments, I don't have to follow that. This is the modern world we live in. We're not living in the 7th century anymore. We're living in the 21st century. My dear brothers, is the Allah of the 7th century any different of the Allah of the 21st century? It's the same. Has the message of Islam, was it meant only for the 7th century? Was it only meant for a certain time and place? On the contrary, the religion of Allah, or the religion that Allah sent down, is an eternal religion until the day of judgment. To compartmentalize Islam, I'm going to take this and I'm going to leave that, shows that you really don't believe in Islam. You don't believe in Allah. You don't believe in the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If you believed in Allah, you would not have the audacity to say, I don't have to follow this. To believe that it is permissible to follow a way of life, to follow a system of laws other than the Sharia, negates one's testimony of Islam. It doesn't matter whether you think that that system of laws is better than Islam, whether it is equivalent to Islam, or even whether it is lesser than Islam but permissible to turn to. If someone says, oh yes, the laws of Islam are better, but it's all right to be a socialist or a communist or a pure democracy, it's all right. Even this goes against one's testimony of faith. To allow the permissibility of judging by other than the law of Allah is a negation of one's testimony of faith.
Wow.
That's a problem.
That's the first advertisement I've ever seen for going back to the 7th century. And he makes it really clear that, Muhammad he's the same today as he was then. The words of, Allah and Muhammad the same. So you can't pretty it up. I mean, it is what it is. And I understand that he was kind of referring to he was talking about other Muslims essentially that were, maybe not fully following this, but his goal, in a lot of countries, when you have this, if you have like a nominally Muslim country, and then you have the hardliners come in, it's not that there's two different Islams. It's not that there's more than one version. But it is like he said, you're either following it or you're not following it. He wants it followed to the T. That means everything that Muhammad did, that is your standard. That's a scary thought, but I'm glad we've got that because that's in his own words.
Absolutely. And what's scary is that he is the resident scholar at the East Plano, Texas Islamic Center. So he's originally from Tennessee, which I think is really scary. He spent most of his time in Memphis, but he has quite a few connections in Nashville. And so I think that's so important to show because he is a strict adherer and believer in Sharia law. And so he's behind these epic cities as well as the other communities. And I had said, to you that there are already dozens of communities in that area between Irving, Grapevine, outside of Dallas, Plano. There are dozens of these Muslim-only communities, and it's just house after house. Each street has an Islamic name to it. Some of the developments actually have titles in them that refer back to when Muslims were in control of the Arabian Peninsula. So there's a lot of things wrong there. So, with Governor Abbott trying to I think, appease people, it never should have gotten this far. None of these developments should have ever gotten this far. There's a difference. Someone had asked me about, well, what about, you've got all the Orthodox or Hasidic Jews in areas of Brooklyn, New York. Yeah, but they're not planned communities. People migrated there because it was convenient for them. There was a synagogue or a store that was kosher, sold kosher products, or the schools for their children. But they haven't said, you must follow our laws.
Right.
Just like the Irish in Boston, they're Catholics. They're not imposing. And our friend Bill Warner used to say at the beginning of every one of his talks, which I think is so perfect, he would say, Jews say they don't eat pork. Muslims say you won't eat pork.
Right. Yeah, they want it. And that's the thing. Political Islam is not about them per se. It's about what they want to force on the non-Muslims around them. And that's the danger. If they want to pray 5 times a day, that's fine. We don't want them praying 5 times a day in the middle of the road or in front of a business, blocking traffic, blocking pedestrians. Yeah. We don't want to hear their prayer calls. If they're supposed to pray 5 times a day, fine. But we don't want to hear the prayer calls. And apparently, I guess up in New York, they're doing that, right?
New York
just approved that. That's insane. Now, I hope it doesn't last long. I hope the people in New York say no and just shut it down. But who knows? Yeah. Who knows?
And those things can be heard forever.
Oh, I know.
Isn't just, a neighborhood thing. It's heard all over.
I got to tell you this. I was in Iraq, and I hated that sound. I hate it. 5 times a day, I hated that sound. Every time I heard it, I wanted to take an AT-4 and blow the damn thing up. It just will drive you up the wall. Never did. I never did do that, but that's what I wanted to do. So
it's really, some people describe it as beautiful, because it is a Muslim who's reciting prayers, singing. But that's just another form of Sharia law, and same with praying in the streets.
Yep.
That is, not because they don't have any place else to pray. Yep. They want to force you to listen to what they're saying.
Yep.
And so, that's a huge problem. But we still have some more on Yasser Qadi. I have another video clip here where he just kind of comes right out and talks about our freedoms are basically biting us in the butt. So that's the next, if we can roll that.
Okay.
I despise aspects of what my government is doing, but I cannot deny that the freedoms that this country gives are unparalleled in the entire globe. No matter what's happening, we will always call people to Islam. So yes, we're going to call them to Islam, and we have that right. And thousands of people are embracing Islam. I'm going to share a personal story. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. I'm not bragging or boasting. Astaghfirullah. But I'm telling you factually, it made me so happy. I just got the message right now on email. I was at MIT, right, giving the protest, and a young man came to me, very, like he liked what he heard, came up to me, started talking, asking about Islam, and I literally went aside from the crowd, and I really spent like 5-10 solid minutes with him, just giving him da'wah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I got an email from the president of MIT. That person you took aside, he just took the shahada today. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So this is how our victory is going to be. Our victory is going to be one person after another, one brother or sister after another. These Generation Z and millennials and these under the age of 35, within a decade, they're going to be the CEOs. They're going to be the congressmen. Within 20 years, they're going to be in the Senate and in the White House. So victory is long term. Stop thinking about today. Victory is going to come. We might not see it, but we have to be a part of the process. They've lost their own children and grandchildren to the cause upon the truth. Understand, when we all come together and we influence the people around us and we create a tidal wave of change, which has already begun. I was so astonished. Every campus I'm going to, the Muslims are probably 10-15% of the protesters. 80 to 90% are non-Muslims. This country has lost the next generation on this cause. We thank Allah for that. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. They cannot shut our voices down. Collectively, we are more powerful than any entity and government on the face of this earth.
Wow. You know, so that's scary. It's sad and it's scary. So we've got this younger generation that's accepting this kind of stuff. They've lost, you know, we hear this all the time. If you ever listen to like Christian radio, we talk about being in a post-Christian America. Well, a lot of these people a lot of these young people will end up flocking to that. But, you know, here's what that means. That means that all these people are flocking to a religion founded by Muhammad, who was a raping, murdering pedophile. And that's their spiritual leader. And the way he lived his life, the things he said, the things he did, that is considered the ideal Muslim. And that's what these people are going to be following. And another thing that's really scary is we're losing the war of the womb. I don't know if you've paid any attention, but I saw something the other day, and it talked about how few in America. We were talking about this. How few kids that the Native Americans, you know, American citizens are having, the traditional American citizen is having, versus all these Muslims. And that's Muslims whether they're born here or Muslims whether they come from another country. They're having 3 and 4 kids. We're having 1.6. I'm not sure what a 0.6 kid looks like. Okay, but we're barely replacing our population.
Yeah, there's a video clip out there that I actually have vetted the information, and it talks about the different fertility rates across America and, of course, across Europe. And then they talk about the boom in the migration, and it's from Islamic migration, of course. But right now in America, the fertility rate is 1.6. And so to sustain a culture, it's almost becoming impossible to do that. Muslims have a 3.1 fertility rate. So they're way ahead of us. And, you know, they'll have as many kids as they can because they believe that Allah will provide for those children no matter what their circumstances. So that part is very, very scary. But, you know, when you look at the big picture, this isn't, nothing that we're talking about is new. Nope. This has been planned since we learned about it through the manifesto, the Muslim Brotherhood manifesto, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But we know that this isn't something that's just happening overnight. You know, they've planted themselves into this country. I think they started coming back in the 60s or even the 50s. But, you know, when they got here, it was strictly for dawah, or the proselytizing of Islam. And so in that same video called The Demographic Problem, they have a Muslim scholar who's saying they don't need, it was Gaddafi that said they don't need bombs and guns to take over the Western world. They have certainly come from within. They have dawah. But then there's another Islamic scholar who says they will change us through dawah. And so, you know, we're allowing them to continue their religion. They're building mosques at record rates, Islamic centers at record rates. And just so people, there's a difference between mosques and Islamic centers. And so I think that distinction is very important because they believe in running the mosques the way the Prophet Muhammad did. And so you look at how he ran his mosques. They were places for military operations. They talk about battalions being in mosques. And so, you know, what you're saying is so true about they have to imitate the life of the Prophet Muhammad. So their mosques have to imitate, you know, what he had in their mosques. And then we know that the Islamic centers are places for the community to gather and to do community things and whatever. But, you know, when you start using military terms like battalions and operations, it makes you really kind of wonder why we are allowing these to go forward. Yeah. And so, you know, if you live in a county in Tennessee or anywhere, but specifically in Tennessee, and you don't have a mosque yet, you better be paying attention to who's buying up your property in your county. And then from there, I often tell people what you can do, in instances like this, is you better know who your planning commissioners are and your zoning commissioners are.
Yep.
These things need to be nipped in the bud. And while I like Governor Abbott, I just think that he's appeasing people by launching an investigation. It's too late. They've already laid the groundwork for this. They have dozens of these communities. And, how do you stop that? The growth of Islamic centers and mosques in this country, I think I lost count. There's over 100 mosques in the state of Tennessee. And they're concentrated within the four big cities.
Right.
But Nashville alone, I believe, had 16, if I counted right. And so that's a lot. That, for the buckle of the Bible Belt to have this many mosques, I think it's disturbing. So,
and let's not forget Stewart County, where I live. They have the compound out there, Muslim compound, which is Jamaat al-Fukra. They've got, at last count, 35 of those type compounds across the country. And, over the years, I've asked different questions, okay, who's watching, who's paying attention? And I've been at briefings where, the feds are watching them. Well, first off, the feds are watching them is no comfort, all right?
no.
I mean, absolutely. And then sometimes, the locals keep in. Okay, no, that's no comfort either. They've been there for a long time, and a lot of the people have become, used to it. And since nothing's blown up, they're like, oh, okay, I guess they're all right. And they don't understand how that whole thing operates. I don't really see them growing as a community, but you and I have done some digging on this, and they are definitely connected to some of the other organizations across the country, and there's been some shady things come out of there. Let's just put it that way.
Oh yeah, but you're referring to 35 of these compounds. The one in Dover is Islamville.
Right.
It used to be on Dreamwood Lane. I'm sure it's still there.
Yeah, but
then the one that I'm familiar with is in Hancock, New York. That's Islamberg. That's a pretty large compound. And I remember different times that I visited there. They wanted to invite me in, but they said that they had to run me by the feds before they would allow me in.
Run you by the feds, so they're controlling the feds.
Run me by the feds. So I thought, that's interesting. But these are dangerous. Jamaat al-Fukra, that's their covert name. They are Muslims of America is on their signs.
Right.
But it is Jamaat al-Fukra. And that is run by Sheikh Jilani of Pakistan, who was responsible for having Daniel Pearl beheaded. Yep. And so I know, that goes way back, but these things, they still exist. And the other interesting thing is the majority of these compounds, the 35 compounds that we're talking about, are on some type of important or very close to a very important infrastructure. Right. The one in Hancock is right on the Cannondale Reservoir, which supplies New York City with its drinking water.
Right.
And then the one in North Carolina that sits close to a nuclear plant. The one in Dover, I believe, is not far from a TVA.
It's not far from TVA. There's power lines right there. It's not far from Fort Campbell. I mean, there's a lot of issues there.
And that's how they put it. They do that. So you have that problem, which kind of goes, unseen and unchecked. They've been involved. Usually, it's in some type of blue collar crimes. We did a big article. You and I, did that article on them years ago. Maybe it's time to refurbish, or rebring those back.
And when we say they, we mean the group in general. We're not talking so much specifically about, that might not necessarily reference specifically the group at Dover, but that group is part of Muslims of America, Jamaat al-Fukra, and I encourage people to look it up. Matter of fact, the feds did put out, back in 2006, they put out a booklet about them, warning about them. Okay, in 2006, it was on the internet, and I've seen copies of it, and they laid out, because really they go back. I think the first incident involving that overall group was out in Colorado in the 90s.
Yeah,
and they arrested him with they actually the feds kind of backed out, and they kind of let the state take care of it, but they had a lot of heavy weapons and explosives and other things, and there was a lot of, I don't know how that ever turned out, but that was the first major issue I heard about them It was back in the 90s,
Yeah.
early 90s.
And that was, we had a gentleman at the time had gone, mutual friend of ours had gone out there to take some pictures. And, it's unlike the developments that are occurring down in Texas.
Right.
They're more, certainly poverty stricken.
Right.
But the fact is they still are there. And as long as, I had somebody ask me the other day at this talk that I gave, how do you, what is a good Muslim as opposed to a bad Muslim? I'm like, well, there's no such delineation there. They're all the same. But you can tell, if they believe in the Shahada is the first pillar of Islam. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the prophet. That is the most unifying of all pillars across all sects of Islam, across all countries. And so if that's, something they say every single day, and then also, obviously, if they believe in Sharia law.
Right.
Because that is there is no such thing as man-made law. It's all about Allah's laws.
Yep.
You heard what Yasser Qadi said, about, who are you people? Who do you think you are? You vote. Well, yeah, we're in a modern society. That's what we do, but they do not do it that way. And so, there's been talk again about the global caliphate, which, a lot of people don't think, we have this constitution. You will never be able to do this. That constitution's being shredded by our own politicians, let alone the Muslims. But the global caliphate, will be one God, one law, and one government. And it's not Jesus Christ, and it's not American law, and it's not an American person that would be running the government.
Yeah.
So that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And that is their goal, is the global caliphate.
Right.
And I get so tired of people saying that will never happen here. Well, it's happening here. We're just not seeing and reading about it. It's just not active. It's through their dawah or their proselytizing.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you right now, if any of the people out there are involved in interfaith, get out of it, because interfaith is a farce and a scam, and it's hurting our churches. So, that's just something to think about if you're going to be involved in that.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that they cling to,
Right. Well, one of the things too, and they are patient, and like he said in his tape, this is not an overnight thing. And Americans, 4 years is forever, and about the longest we can focus on something is 4 years. Well, they're fine with 40 years, and they're going to beat us on the demographic game. I mean, they're having more kids. We're getting older, and the younger generations coming up is not having kids. So, number one, they very well could take us over. If you look what's going on in Europe, I mean, a lot of Europe is going to be Islamic in probably 10 years. And in places like France and Germany, the only way they could stop that at this point would be with a war. I mean, they'd have to actually literally go out there and clear them out. That would be the only way in those countries. And I think that's true in parts of England, maybe not all of it, but certainly parts of it. London, I mean, you couldn't pay me to go there now. But think about it long term. They could definitely do it long term. If you look at the birth rate issue, and if you look at how they have the long term view, and we just look for the next 4 years, and it could happen. But here's the thing, even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't matter so much. I mean, it does matter if it happens, it's even worse. But the fact that they're trying, the fact that that's their goal, you can't discount people's intentions just because you don't think they will be successful. If they have bad intentions, you still have to address it. And everybody needs to know about it. It's a shame that 24 years after 9/11, our police forces don't know anything about Islam. They don't know anything to look for. I know you taught classes about what to look for in certain stores. And oh, by the way, a lot of these stores are set up in little towns across Tennessee, because a lot of them have taken over these little small stores out in the country somewhere. And there's certain things, our law enforcement is not taught that. Our military is not taught about the doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's a shame, 25 years after the fact, or almost 25 years after the fact.
Go back to the number of Muslims. in America, the current, according to the Congressional Budget Office, the current number of Muslims that we can kind of put our arms around, that we can grasp the number, is about 5 million. They predicted by this year there would be 9 million, but we honestly don't really know how many, million there are. But 5 million, I don't know the percentage of that off the top of my head, but that's a lot. And then you look at different countries. I believe it was Germany and Norway were way more than half of the population. The numbers in France were outrageous. And I was very surprised to know that Russia has over 25 million Muslims.
Yep.
I wasn't sure how they were getting by, living in Russia, but 25 million in Russia is a lot. And so the numbers, when they talk about the hijra, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's the coming of Muslims, the migration of Muslims into non-Muslim countries.
Right. And,
with an open border, we really have lost track of how many Muslims have come into this country.
Yeah.
And so, it is a problem, and people need to really be mindful that Islam is not a religion, is a political movement camouflaged as a religion. Yep. And, just because they have a holy book doesn't necessarily mean they're a religion.
Yeah, and just because they say that they're an Abrahamic faith doesn't mean anything either.
That's right. They just, they've been very brilliant when it comes to the strategy that they have put forward. And Yasser Qadi says it in the beginning of that last video clip. In the very beginning, he says he despises what this government is doing. And then, goes on to say, though, our freedoms are like none other in the world. Yep. And that allows them to lay the foundation for their, their dawah and all this other stuff.
He despises our freedoms, but he'll use it against us and use it effectively.
Exactly, yep. And then at the end, when he says our kids, our young children, our millennials and Gen Zs, are accepting Islam, and he said 80% of the protesters for Hamas were non-Muslims. So, and that's how they get them. We talked about too, when they go into these classrooms, the Muslim Student Association, they go into these classrooms or they have these seminars. This is how they draw the young people. They promise them, and it's big time in the prisons, they promise them a better life. You'll be a better person if you convert to Islam. And this is the life that we can give you. And of course, they see these mansions and these developments, and they think this is how they might live if they accept Islam. And that's not even close to the truth, but this is how they paint that picture. Everything will be beautiful if you just would accept Islam. And so I think he's right in that aspect. We have nothing to offer these young people. They are so turned off by Christianity or whatever, type of, whether it's Judaism or Christianity, Catholicism. These young people are very turned off by that. And maybe rightfully so. We're not out there, proselytizing our religion at all. And so, they've got the upper hand in that, and that's a problem.
Well, I would say on that, we don't do a good job of really, most of the kids go off to college. If they were Christian before they went to college, they didn't really learn enough and get grounded enough before they went off to college. And when they went to college, whatever they had, they lost. I mean, it just didn't, they didn't survive, didn't make it through their freshman year. Well, now that's getting to be the same thing in the schools in K through 12. And of course, if you go to church once a week, if you go and your kids, they get that little bit of time there. Well, the rest of the week they're in school, which is secular, and all the schools are secular. If you go to a public school, and think about it, what have they been pushing for years? For years, here, even in Tennessee, if you look in the textbooks will have a disproportionate amount dedicated to Islam, all in glowing terms, a lesser amount on Christianity, but it's all let's just point out what somebody who was a Christian did that was bad or wrong in the old days. And so that's what they've been getting for all these years. They've been getting this anti-Christian, anti-American indoctrination from our schools, And so
Yes.
that's part of the problem. That's a big part of the problem.
And then you see then, how they handle that. When you look at what our societal issues are right now, the Muslims are sitting back and they're relishing the problem that we're having right now.
Yeah.
When you have the LGBTQ movement, transgenderism,
Yeah.
all things that they'll throw you off a roof for.
Right.
But yet we're embracing it and pushing it and letting our kids think that well, it's okay to think a man can get pregnant. So they sit back and they just kind of hold their breath and know that eventually that will make our kids go to them.
Well, and even some churches, so-called churches, have supported that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so we got when you have a almost morally bankrupt church in the country, and I'm not saying every church, I'm not saying all, I'm just saying overall.
Yeah.
It's an easy target. It's an easy target.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of, in the colleges especially, there is a lot of, blame the Jews for everything. I mean, they get that. They hear that a lot. And, that's what they get. So that's what they kind of...
and they're being attacked on college campuses. I mean, Muslims like to say they're the victims. And right now they are not victims. They haven't been victims.
No.
If anybody's the victim, it's the Jewish students on these college campuses, I just want to go back to, when I talked about how these intentional communities empower, for the power and influence. CARE had put forward what they hoped to do was thousands of people to run for office. Right. Across the country, though, in the midterms in 2022, we know that 235 Muslims won positions anywhere from local school boards to judiciary positions across the country. Yeah. CARE is promising to run in the next election 5,000, which, we'll have to see. They like to set their numbers high.
Right.
But 235, and then you talk about the positions that they're in, that's not good. No. And, we have, in this state, we only have two. They're both in Nashville. And one is Berthina Naba McKinney, who is the head of the Nashville International Academy. And then the other is our favorite, Zulfat Suara, who is a Muslim, the first Muslim woman to be at the Metro Council. She ran in a large position because she knew that her district wouldn't have enough votes for her. So she ran, she's very smart, ran at large.
Right.
The problem with her is, I believe she's using the Common Council as just a stepping stone, whether she would now run for mayor or, for worse, another position. But this is where we need to pay attention to who you're voting for. Right. Here's a woman from Nigeria who never, ever speaks out against the Christians that are being slaughtered in Nigeria on a daily basis.
Right.
She's just off in her own little world.
Well, and talk about some of her connections, some of the connections that she's had with known Islamists across the country.
She's been involved in the American Muslim Advisory Council, which is basically CARE. It's a CARE version. Somebody asked me that, why we don't have CARE in this state, because they have over 600 chapters. But I think, if you remember, as a group, we collectively went after CARE really, really bad. In about, I think it was 2012 to 2014, we were nonstop against CARE. And I will proudly say, I think we kept them from coming to this state.
Well, they just rename it and call it AMAC.
Yeah, it's AMAC, the American Muslim Advisory Council.
Right.
Zulfat is still a member of that organization. But she was given an award a couple of years ago from the #1 Muslim Brotherhood group in this country, the Islamic Society of North America. They lauded her for her work in interfaith. And so, she has some dreadful connections. We have pictures of her on our website. With Rashida Tlaib, who is an anti-American, anti-Jew, you name it, she hates it. And then her and Ilhan Omar, where she says that she's inspired by those two. And, if you're inspired by people that hate America, people that hate Jews and hate Christians, that's not a good thing, So People need to, look at her and follow her and understand what her goal is as well. And so I think that's what bothers me too. People look at her, she's very enthusiastic, she's very animated, her charisma is wonderful, and people love her, but look who she is. Look to see who she really is, and see if you vote for her again, because she's anti everything that we stand for. So that's another problem that we have.
And they're organized in Tennessee, because they even have a Muslim Day on the Hill at our legislature every year.
Yeah, they just had it in March. They don't really come out and talk so much about it, but they've had it for several years. Muslim Day on the Hill, where they go and as a group, and then they venture off to meet their different state representatives. I was pleased that Scott Sapicki did show up at my talk last week, which was interesting. But we need to pay attention to what who they're talking to as well. We don't have a Christian Day on the Hill. We don't have a Jew Day on the Hill. So, it's kind of disturbing that they, for several years now, have been afforded this whole day to go and just to be able to speak to our state representatives. That doesn't happen very easily with us. Yeah. We have to make appointments or whatever. But it's not the same thing that's afforded to us.
No. Well, and it bothers me that I'm not surprised that the Democrat reps would meet with him, but it bothers me that any Republican would even meet with him. I mean, but that shows the ignorance about what this doctrine is, and that it is a threat. It's not compatible with our Constitution. It's not compatible with civilization. If you doubt me, just look at what's going on in Europe. Pick a country in Europe where they've had a big influx of them, and see what's going on. I mean, people, they won't walk the streets at night. On your website, you've got the explanatory memorandum for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, I think that's one thing that every law enforcement agency should teach to their officers. I think that should be taught in the military, so that people understand their plan. It's their plan. It's not our thoughts on their plan. It's their plan. Can you talk about that a little bit, some of the key points on that?
Yep. This is called the explanatory memorandum. You and I refer to it as the manifesto. An explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group in North America. And you start reading through this, and then you come upon one that we've talked about a lot, but it's in here. And it talks about the Ikhwan must understand their work in America is a kind of grand jihad, which is war, in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within.
Yep.
So, if you were to substitute the word white supremacist or MAGA or anything, Republican into this, you'd be gone.
Yeah, the feds would be all over you.
Oh my gosh. But this document, it isn't just some document. It was found during an FBI raid in a Hamas member's house, along with another treasure trove of documents. This was admitted into evidence. It has evidentiary value. As a matter of fact, it's stamped with an evidence stamp in our trial down in Texas, Dallas, Texas, back in 2008.
The Holy Land Foundation trial?
Yep, it was this country's largest trial.
I've got a question on that. Like you said, it was the largest terrorism financing trial. CARE was an unindicted co-conspirator. Now, I think also they basically said that CARE is Hamas, and Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. I mean, by the U.S. government, they were designated a terrorist organization, and that CARE is Hamas. Has the statute of limitations run out on that trial? Could CARE or anybody involved with that be indicted, or is too much time passed?
I don't know that the time would be a problem, but there again, it's the who you would get to go after them. There may be a loophole there that they probably could go around for the time frame, because I mean it was 2008, so it's not like it was, I think it went on to 2009. So yeah, there's several years there, but if they had a good enough case, they could reopen it and certainly go after them again.
Right.
But, for people who hear us say these things, go to the United States State Department website and put in foreign terrorist organizations, and they will give you a list. And Hamas is still on that list. And, big old letters, Hamas. And so, we said earlier that that's a problem. But back to this document. This document is a treasure trove. I mean, that little blip that I read about, coming from within in our own country, there's so much more. They list all these organizations that they consider to be friends of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yep.
We have probably there's more than a half dozen. I would say we probably have a dozen organizations in this country that are flourishing. And they exist. They have their conferences every year. There's 29 different organizations that they consider to be friends. I'd say we probably have 24 of them in this country.
Wow.
So I think that's, very dangerous. But the document itself, there's so much more than just the number 4 is what we always read, because that says it all. But there's so many other things that they tell you. They even list what they need, what they know they need. They need a newspaper outlet, a radio station, a TV station. They need, women to be involved in dawah. And so they've got all of that, and I even have the list of things, their Al Jazeera TV, Al Jazeera newspapers. They have all these things right now in our country. And the Islamic Society of North America, their headquarters is in Plainfield, Indiana. And it's mind-boggling to us, those, like you and I that know what the extent of their goal is, and that they exist the way they do exist in this country. And the other thing, Dave, that, I think people should look, and I believe I have a copy of this on our website, is the 4 stages of Islamic conquest. Yep. And, there's only 4 stages, and there's components in the third that we do have.
What are those?
The stage 1 is called just infiltration. The first migration wave to non-Muslim, what they consider to be a host country, the high Muslim birth rate in our country, calls to criminalize Islamophobia as a hate crime, and boy, they've been pushing that for a long time. Yep. Threatened legal action for perceived discrimination, and offers of interfaith dialogue. We checked just about every single one of those off a long, long time ago. The second one is consolidation of power. The proselytizing increases. Absolutely it does. We have Muslim student associations I think there's about 36 chapters of the MSA throughout this state, just the state alone.
Yeah, just Tennessee. Yeah, they came here in 1963, so I'm sure they're in every major university, any college of any size. I'm sure they've got one.
Yeah. Attempts to indoctrinate children to the Islamist viewpoint. With you already touched base on, how we went through the crap with the textbooks and where the textbooks were coming from. The continued focus on enlarging the Muslim population, development of Muslim political base, which we know we have the United States Council of Muslim Organizations now, which is their first political party, that they've kind of launched that nobody talks about. There's been talk of the clandestine amassing of weapons in mosques. That's hard to prove. We've never and will never see law enforcement raid a mosque. I don't think we will, but you never know. If we could get Trump and his people to learn what the doctrine is, we'd be okay.
Well, I want to say something on that real quick in reference to Hedgepath. Apparently, Hedgepath has a tattoo on one of his arms that says Kafir. And so he understands, and I hope that, eventually that makes it down to the DOD, and maybe he'll talk to his buddy Kash Patel and say, hey, you might need to know what's going on here and understand what's going on. Because I don't have any indication that he does on this issue. Let's put it that way. On this issue, I don't have any reason to believe that he has a clue. I mean, January 1st, you had the attack in New Orleans. And I guess there was some news on it the other day. They linked that guy to someone in Iraq. But that happened January 1st. This is May. Haven't heard squat.
No, and it didn't come out like on all the news stations, didn't blast it, that he was associated with a member, and it probably was the guy that was just arrested in Iraq. He was involved with and a supporter of ISIS. He had the ISIS connection.
Yeah.
So, you know, and people forget about that. That was Shamsuddin Jabbar, who killed 14 people in New Orleans on New Year's Eve.
Yep.
You know, and how quickly people forget. But, you know, there's that connection. And we know, you know, when we hear those names, it's not profiling. It's not jumping to conclusions. It's we knew the way that it happened. Myself and Chris Holton were on back after that happened and talked about, you know, the connections and just how they do things. You know, they have a set way to do things. And so we knew that was something that they do. And there was just another one that I think it was up in Vancouver or...
Yep. I remember hearing about that too. That's been recent. Yeah. You know, it's only going to get worse as time goes on, especially when people don't seem to have a clue. It's like, oh, wow, happened again. And none of our government at any level or law enforcement, which is part of the government, they don't seem to make the connection. If they do, they're awful quiet about it. What really I think needs to happen, you know, everybody needs to be familiar with that explanatory memorandum. That's them in their own words. You know, you don't have to go read the Quran. You don't necessarily have to go read a lot of Islamic texts. I would recommend you read, obviously, your book. You give a good outline of how they operate. But if they just read the explanatory memorandum, that would tell you what they want to do. And yours kind of gives a good example of the different of what they've done so far following that explanatory memorandum. So it's definitely a book worth reading.
And for anybody that wants to look at the document, it is on dailyrollcall.com. You know, we're under the tab that's the Islamic documents. The first several pages on most of these documents are in Arabic, but the English is attached to it. So get through the first 10 pages of Arabic, and then it's right there in English. And it is something, you know, so people understand that it isn't something that we made. This is their own words. And so I think it's very valuable. And it would be a treasure trove for law enforcement. Like I say, if it had any other names listed on it, you know, we'd all be in jail by now, or the writers would be in jail. So it's unfortunate that, you know, we don't look as the Muslim Brotherhood. I remember Obama almost romanticized the Muslim Brotherhood.
Oh, he appointed a bunch of them.
Exactly.
To the DHS.
Some of them are still around. There was a guy by the name of Kareem Shora who worked for Homeland Security. I believe he has still some type job within our Homeland Security. So there was a bunch. Rashad Hussein, who was also with the OIC, and he may still be working in the interfaith partnership part of from the White House. So when you talk, you know, about Hegseth having the kafir, just so people know, a kafir means non-Muslim. You know,
infidel,
you're dirty. An infidel. And that is very encouraging to know.
It's like giving giving the finger to them. It's kind of the way of saying, you know, I'm an infidel, and, you know,
we do that every day. We do it every day. But let me just finish up with the stage 4. Stage 3 is open war on leadership and culture. We only have a few. Destruction of churches and synagogues. We're not seeing so much the destruction as they're buying churches. As churches are closing down, the Muslims are there to buy them up, and then they are very active right now. Toppling of government and the, you know, usurping our political power. They're trying. You know, it's like Muslim Day on the Hill. You know, they'll do anything to kind of usurp our political power and whatnot. And then certainly imposition of Sharia law. We do see it. It's not in every state, but there are Sharia courts. New Jersey is probably one of the worst. And then you've got Minnesota, obviously, and Michigan, who Michigan actually is just as bad as Texas, I think. But they do have Sharia courts there. They say they're only for dissolving marriages, divorces and things like that.
Yeah.
But
in Tennessee, we did pass a law several years ago. For those who are listening, we did pass a law that only the U.S. and Tennessee constitutions are valid in Tennessee. No other foreign law of any type. So that was done years ago in Tennessee. Some other states have done it. Some have done it recently. But that doesn't get you off the hook. And here's the thing, too. Like that Epic City they're trying to do down in Texas, they already have other places. As they grow and expand out, well, okay, they're going to take political control of that area. And that's how, jihad does not necessarily mean they're going to strap a bomb to themselves and go blow themselves and everybody else around them up. There's other ways of jihad, and especially, they're patient. They'll have more kids. We'll die out. Our government's clueless, are just too scared to do anything, whatever the case might be. So that's how they can do it. Yeah, they're morons. We got a lot of morons. Especially our state government. We got a bunch of morons in our state government. So
yeah, it's coming, unfortunately. And then stage 4, forget it. That's when we go from Dar el Harb to Dar el Islam, from House of War to House of Islam. Sharia becomes the law of the land. Non-Islamic human rights are canceled, freedom of speech and the press are eradicated. But that stuff's happening in the UK.
Oh yeah,
and
it's out of
and
control.
That's what's and they're losing their freedom of speech. If you offend a Muslim, then that's a problem apparently over in the UK.
And there are people here that would go for that if they could. And I'm not talking about the Muslims. There are some on the left that would go for that. If there are some that would put me and you in jail tonight if they could, for just what we've said tonight, if they could get away with it.
Absolutely. And that's what I don't understand. I get why they do it, because they're not real smart and they use feelings instead of facts.
Right.
Liberals are strange, but it's not about the Muslims. We're not sitting here saying we hate them or anything else. As a matter of fact, I pity them if they're following, Muhammad. But it's all about what Islam is and is not. And, Islam is...
It's not a live and let live religion, that's for sure.
No, it's a political way of life, and it dictates every aspect of your life.
Absolutely. Hey,
and I don't...
I'm going to have to get to your closing thoughts here, because I've got a second guest at 8:30. So,
man, we do talk a lot. I know. Well, my closing thoughts, pretty much, to sum up everything. I think that it's really important. I have seen some awakening from people around the state. People are getting more involved. I did have a woman at my talk who came up and said, when she came in, she was in total darkness, had no clue about anything. And when she left, she was filled with a lot of questions, but a lot of information that she'd never heard before. And so, I can ask people to just research, do your own, don't listen to the news. They still think, they still call, Palestinians, Palestinians, and they're not. There's no such thing. So there's no such thing as radical Islam or radical Muslims.
There's just
Pay
Islam.
attention.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just Islam.
Yep.
And so read the Quran. You go from the Mecca years to the Medina years. You'll see the difference. There's the hadiths and all these other things. But I think there is an awakening. And you and I have been at this for a long time, and I don't know where it's headed, but certainly if people have questions, they can. My email is on the website. I can be reached through my website, dailyrollcall.com.
Yep.
And certainly, the threat in our backyard is the Muslim Brotherhood is my book that's available on Amazon. I can be reached through, anything like that. So if you have questions, please feel free to, reach out to myself, even to Dave, because we do a lot of work together. And so we need to pay attention to what's happening locally, because locally is where everything is built upon and where everything happens.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
pay attention to that. So, but thanks for having me on again. Boy, we can talk up a storm, that's for sure.
Well, hey,
I'm sure I'll have more.
Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for all you do. Definitely have you back. I want to thank the audience for taking the time to watch our program tonight. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. Check out our radio podcasts on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and X. Join us again tonight at 8:30 p.m. Central for our guest, Steve Hickey, the Williamson County GOP chairman, here to discuss the recent election and some of the tactics used by the opposition and other issues inside the GOP. This Wednesday, we will have a special show that will air at 5 p.m. featuring Dr. Bill Warner and Milan Podlipany, the founders of the Center for the Study of Political Islam, and what everyone needs to understand about it, and to include how to fight back. Our guest next week, May 12th, will be H.K. Egerton, the Black Confederate. He will join us to provide some rarely heard but desperately needed historical truth about our bloodiest conflict and its aftermath. Hope you'll join us again next week. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.